Good morrow, mother forkers. It is I, Fork, as you no doubt knew. Today, as I'm sure you can tell, we're going to be doing something a little differently. I recently played through Deus Ex Human Revolution, and have a few bones to pick with the end of it. It's completely normal to have an issue with endings of games, but this one I felt I felt I needed to get these words out there, and I want to know what you guys think of it. So, I'm going to be discussing the endings at length. I'll try and keep details vague, but keep in mind that there will be spoilers. I'm discussing the ending of a game here, so consider yourself warned. Without further ado, I would like to present Deus Ex Human Revolution, How It Should Have Ended, an analysis of choice. There's something to be said about stories that wind and twist and turn in all sorts of manners. They're beautiful and intricate, and they usually end at an amazing center point that typically coincides with two things: realization and closure. This is especially true when talking about games with choice, especially player choice. When we have an ending that lets the player choose how the game universe continues on after the fact, it adds another layer to the experience. In this video, I'm going to be discussing my issues with the ending of Eidos Montreal's Deus Ex Human Revolution. Human Revolution is a prequel, which means it takes place before works we've already got in order to further flesh out the universe. This means that when we sit down to play through this story, we already know the general outcome. We already know the effects that our actions have. We already know what happens in the future. We already knew that augmentation will continue no matter what decisions we make throughout the game. Everything is set in stone. As we go through the game, we're merely there to observe and learn more about what happened before the original Deus Ex and before Invisible War, and hopefully we have some challenging fun on the way. And therein lies the blaring issue with games like Human Revolution and other prequels, where they tout player choice as a huge factor. Games like these imply and try to enact some level of choice, whether it be how we play the game or who lives and dies. We decide these things. We decide how to interrogate, how to persuade, and how to move the plot forward. Before we get to the end, though, some background. Deus Ex, the first game, was set in the year 2052. Human augmentation is a commodity, and many people, rich and poor alike, are augmented in some form or fashion. As for the ethics of augmentation, this issue is pretty much pushed from the average civilian's mind by wars against terrorism, poverty, and plague. The soldiers, investigators, and even secretaries are augmented. Unlike in Human Revolution, the Humanity Front hardly makes an appearance, giving a feeling that human augmentation is nearly universally accepted. Throughout Human Revolution, however, the most important question being asked is the following: is human augmentation fine to leave alone, to let grow and expand, or should it be regulated, or even halted entirely? And what about the ethics of the whole thing? As you progress through the story of Human Revolution, many issues of ethics arise, and the player is put into many a moral gray area, though the player is not given too much choice in the matter. There are a couple of segments where you need to infiltrate a private abodes or police stations to hack a computer to blackmail somebody. Easily an illegal and morally ambiguous thing to do, especially given the situation, but in the end you still have to do it, only really being able to choose how it goes down. This is one of the problems with choice in this particular work. It's merely an illusion. At the end of the final act, you are given an ultimatum, a choice of 2 or more endings depending on how you went about everything. This choice is one that will decide the fate of not only augmentation, but the world. And the greatest question of right and wrong we've been presented with in this work, and in the end, it doesn't even matter after the fact. The decision you make here in the final minutes of gameplay feels like it should be so important, and it feels like it's going to be so important until you actually make it. The crescendo is wonderful and artful, but the moments that follow leave much to be desired. Once you make your choice from 2 or 4 buttons, and like I said, depending on how you went about it, set before you on pedestals, you're greeted by flyby shots of nature, narrated by the game's gruff protagonist, Adam Jensen. Depending on what you choose, he will express different views on augmentation, and the film will have slight variations. Once the reflective monologue is finished, that's it. Game over, credits roll, you beat it, congratulations, here are your achievements. The whole thing is underwhelming. Not only is there no closure between characters, there are blaring plot holes left open, and the player has no effect on the world or story of later games, which is what they try to make you feel like you did. and the whole thing is just lackluster at best. Why give me the illusion of changing the world when I really didn't change anything? Why leave me without closure when there are clearly loose ends? I can see what they were trying to do. Maybe the whole point of the choice is to symbolize the futility of the player's actions, because both the player and the developers know that the future still happens how it happens. JC Denton still has to fight the terrorists and all that stuff goes down. It is what it is. I would be able to accept this had the endings been more than what they are now. As it is, they suffer from the same symptoms as Mass Effect 3's infamous ABC red, green, blue endings, minus any forms of closure. Before the point of no return in the game, the player confronts many people and many questions relating to Jensen, Seraph, and Reed arise. Specifically, I'm referring to when Jensen shouts at Reed, "This isn't over, Megan!" on the topic of using his DNA to progress augmentation technology, which, by the way, is never explained. What the hell makes Jensen's DNA so special, and why the hell do we need to use it? How does Seraph and Reed manage to carry on after Jensen is gone? Or how does the confrontation go down when Jensen returns? These are all very important questions for the story, I feel, that are never addressed. This is a major problem for any ending. The lack of any real meaning for the overall plot of the series, the lack of closure for the characters we've all become so attached to and involved with. An ending for a game like this, where almost everything else is well done and further develops plot and characters, should reflect the change each has undergone, should reflect the player's decisions, and it should provide the players with some kind of fucking closure. I've given the lack of closure some thought, and though this isn't my place, here are some suggestions on improving these endings. Take them as they are, they're simple and short possible ideas, how I feel it should have ended. Perhaps if you choose to be on the side of augmentation continuing as is, completely uninhibited, players could be shown video of Jensen talking to Darrow and Seraph about progress and Jensen's DNA. Instead of clips of nature, shows clips of what we did, show clips of augmentation making great advancements quickly and becoming accessible to more people without the worry of getting their next dose of neuropozyne, which is a medication needed for those with augmentations to help prevent rejection and sickness. After the monologue, have some character dialogue between Seraph and Jensen. At Seraph's deathbed, after living a full life, maybe Seraph hands over ownership to Jensen, but preferably he hands it over to Seraph's son, with Jensen being the son's mentor. At some point, Reed and Jensen need to figure out what the hell's going on between them, because we know they've got some kind of crazy tension, but we definitely need to make sure that Jensen knows why it was his DNA that was so special, because this is a huge question for the player. As is, and pardon the pun, the subject of Jensen's DNA is a bit of a Deus Ex Machina. Perhaps if you choose the anti-augmentation, you would have a similar monologue, not the same one, but show Jensen standing alongside Taggart at a major speech. Make it obvious that they're working to slow and regulate the augmentation, but not to stop it completely. Jensen is obviously shunned and unassociated with his former friends and colleagues from Seraph. He loses his position as head of Seraph security, but perhaps he gains a position with Taggart, maybe as a bodyguard or as a political figure. Who knows? But in this ending, because he's no longer in communication with anyone at Seraph, we probably don't learn why his DNA was so magical. If you choose to reveal the truth, perhaps we can have the same monologue but changed up a little bit. We need to describe the outrage of the common man, show clips of riots and of peace talks, debates, and public speeches. The people are understandably furious, but some understand why Darrow did what he did. He needed to make an example, because augmentation is a dangerous and wonderful thing. We need to tread lightly, so that we don't lose ourselves in mechanical influence. Reed and Jensen make amends and maybe get back together, but it isn't likely. Equally unlikely is Jensen maintaining his job at Seraph. But whatever happens with his career and love life, we still need to learn why it was his DNA that was so special. Augmentation is slowed down and the future is still shaky and uncertain. Lastly, we have the final option. Blow the whole damn island up. Make an unknown martyr of yourself. The world will never know what happened. And it carries on in almost the same fashion, but the anti-augmentation party obviously has greater pull given what happened. Riots slowly peter off, but fights for and against augmentation continue in the same-ish manner. Perhaps FEMA can assimilate Seraph at some point, since there's kind of nobody left in charge. Otherwise, this ending was fine. I'm sure that many of you are thinking right now, why hasn't he addressed the other subjects? Why hasn't he addressed how these endings don't affect or analyze how transhumanism has anything to do with the game, which is a huge underlying theme? And I would address it here, but I'm running out of time, and I feel that it is a topic that deserves its own video entirely. These endings are the best I could come up with while keeping things short and relatively spoiler-free. As you can see, they're not perfect. They may not even be better than what we have. But they provide the closure and the reflection of player influence that was missing most from the final moments of the game. To conclude, I present a brief final reflection, some questions for you to answer or think about. Am I correct in my criticisms of this work, or am I just overanalyzing? Were the endings shown purely for symbolism, or should they have more substance? What I say and what I think doesn't matter. It's up to you to make up your own mind. However you feel about this, though, I believe we can all agree on one thing. It was a pretty good game. That's all I have for today, everyone. Fork out.